Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to Force Strategy. Today we're going to be taking a look at a Protoss strategy. Now in this replay, our Protoss player here is Kiwi Kaki, and our Zerg opponent is Liquid's TLO, also known as the Little One. Let's go into Kiwi Kaki vision here though. So we are looking at a Protoss strategy. What are we looking at specifically today? Well, before we get into the strategy itself, I just want you to think about the game in general. Let's think about StarCraft 2. What is StarCraft 2? Or StarCraft period, any RTS really. It's a game of building up an army. All right, you've got your base, you build up an army, and you attack your opponent. Now, what do you need to build up your army? Well, you need the buildings, of course, but in order to make those buildings, in order to make your army itself, you need resources. So fundamentally, the most important thing in the game is resources. That's a fundamental truth, and that's why you should always be building workers. You need to make sure you have a strong economy. You need to make sure you expand. Now, with that said, economy, that's fundamentally the most important thing in the game. You need it to do everything. So a sole purpose of most strategies, or a lot of strategies, are kind of either denying or hindering your opponent's economy. Now, specifically, what we're going to be looking at today is basically just trying to deny a Zerg player his expansion. And this hurts Zerg much more than it does the other races, solely because of the fact that they function off larvae and they need those extra bases in order to make more units. Now, obviously, they have the option of building hatcheries inside of their base to get additional larvae, but that's not nearly as beneficial as having the actual expansion itself, for the obvious fact that they don't have those extra resources. So a lot of Zerg players, they don't open the game by building a hatchery in their base, but instead they'll open the game with a quick expansion. Now, if you can deny your opponent an expansion, and this is the case for anyone, but specifically Zerg, if you can deny your opponent an expansion, that's going to put you greatly ahead of them. And now what you can see that we're doing here at the beginning of the game, this is something that you do see Protoss players do fairly often. It's very tricky, but putting these two probes at the front putting these two pylons at the front of your opponent's base to keep them inside of one base. Now you can see here what actually ended up happening was our opponent went for a very, very early spawning pool, and he was basically trying to hit us really early in the game. But I'm going to go back into Kiwi Kaki vision. So, in seeing that, what we did to delay it was we put down those pylons, and we didn't actually let those die, so don't freak out. Don't say, oh, he wasted so many minerals. He canceled those right before they finished, and that's not a bad idea. If you scout your opponent's base as Protoss and you see a very early Zergling rush coming, like something like a 6 pool, a 7 pool, anything like that, if you see something like that coming, people freak out. They're like, oh, how am I going to defend my base? I need to build a million bases. Well, the first thing you can do is you can really slow them up by putting those two pylons down there. It's going to stop them from their initial push by at least like 20 or 30 seconds, and that's going to buy you plenty of time to get an additional zealot up to finish your wall off here. So very, very good. But back to what we were talking about earlier, denying your opponent an expansion. It's again, probably one of the most important things you can do because of the fact that, as we said earlier, fundamentally, the most important thing in this game is your economy. So if you can hurt someone's economy, then you're in a good spot. Now, we have already technically hurt, quote-unquote, their economy by the fact that they did that rush, we slowed them up, and then on top of that, we prevented them from doing any damage at all. So already they're set back in economy. Now, what we want to do is we want to take this advantage and further add on to it. Now, let's go into the build order. Again, we're just going to be looking at, honestly, it's just a 4-gate build with an expansion. Very standard. But the most important things to look at are how we're playing the game and what we're doing, because these are the strategies and tactics that you can really pull into your own game. So for build order, as we're moving our units across the board to our opponent here, obviously try to avoid getting Zerglings to surround your stalker here. But for the build order, we saw a 9 pylon, a 12 gateway. At 14 supply, we got that Assimilator. At 20 supply, that Cybernetics Core came in, and then at 21 supply, getting that second gateway. 22 supply, started researching that warp gate tech, and then at 32 supply is when we saw that second Assimilator. And that strategy will be posted right up here earlier in the video. Right now, it's obviously not here because I'm recording. So what are we doing right now? You can see that we just moved into our opponent's base, or inside of their natural rather, and there was an expansion building. He was trying to expand because, like I said earlier, economy. Everyone needs a strong economy. If you have a bad economy, you're not going to succeed in this game because you won't have enough resources to build a strong enough army. Now, we stopped that from building, and we also, again, put down these two pylons. This is going to force him to stay inside of his base until he finds some way around these. His different options are going to be to try to break through them with a Baneling's Bust. Bringing Banelings in, trying to kill the buildings, that's obviously an option. Another option is roaches. Roaches do very well in this situation as well. And then you have to think about something like a Nidus Worm, a Nidus Canal, or an Overlord drop. These are the things you need to consider when you're kind of forcefully in front of your opponent's base here. Now we're still going to continue doing our normal stuff here. Again, what I said is we're going for a normal 4 gate. You can see those additional 2 gateways coming down. Those were both dropped at 35 supply. Now with these pylons, we have the added advantage, of course, with that warp gate tech of warping in more units in the front of his base. And what we're going to be doing to further extrapolate this wall in here is once he starts to try to push down, once he starts to bring whatever he decides to bring, again, we don't know at this moment. We do know that he has roaches because we did see this roach warren coming. But if he decides to bring banelings or anything, we have these sentries here, and we're going to use force fields to the best of our ability. Now, something else to consider is that if he can break down one of these pylons, and all we have left to box him in are force fields, you have to worry about burrow. Now, when upgraded, while burrowed, roaches can move. So you need to be aware of that, because he can burrow under force fields. He can't burrow under buildings, but he can burrow under force fields. And actually, what you're seeing right here is that burrow ability is being researched. Again, right now at this point in the game, we don't know it. And we haven't had the chance to get that robotics facility up yet because we've been concentrating on basically being aggressive and boxing our opponent in. And this is a real advantage. Although people might say, oh, he's being cheesy. He's not really being cheesy. He's just playing aggressively. That's all he's doing. We're responding to our opponent. We saw that early push. We tried to stop it, slow it down by putting down pylons. And then we're responding by pushing out against them, knowing the fact that their economy was hurt from the get-go. Pushing out against them, denying any sort of expansion, and then even forcing them inside of their base even longer. Now that pylon's down, obviously he could run down units, and so we're going to kind of rely at this point on these sentries. We're going to rely on the fact that we can use the force field to wall him in. Again, we'd still have to worry about a Nidus Worm as well as an Overlord drop. And now that we see this burrow, we need to think, okay, well, I need to do something to defend myself against this. Obviously, what we'd like to do, get down our robotics facility. This is going to allow us to get some observers out. The other thing too is you might want to consider getting some cannons up, because burrow, you're not gonna. It's gonna be hard to follow him everywhere he goes with just one observer, even with 2 observers. It's gonna be hard to always be on top of them. So maybe getting some defenses up and some photon cannons, not a bad idea as well. But either way, we're in a really strong position at this point. Since our opponent, attacked early, we slowed them up. We stopped them from doing any damage whatsoever by slowing them down with those pylons and then stopping them at our front wall. We're in a really commanding position. That, coupled with the fact that we were able to deny this expansion, really puts us in a strong position. So at this point, it's just kind of about macroing up, continuing to do what you're doing, and then getting expansions. As you can see here, we do have this Nexus up at our natural. That did come down at 54 supply. Again, getting this robotics facility up when we did see that burrow for the roaches going down. So the 2 things we're going to be looking to do, clearly, obviously the observer, so we can see those burrowed units. The other thing too is getting some immortals out. Immortals are very strong against roaches. We've seen pretty roach heavy build, so why not? Some people may say, why is your Zerg opponent not going for Mutalisk? Mutalisk are very strong. Yes, they're a very good unit. Something to realize, Mutalisks are nearly impossible. Not impossible, but they're very difficult to get off of just one base. The main hindrance for a player is his gas. With just 2 gas, with just 2 extractors, it's not nearly enough to mass up a decent-sized Mutalisk force. He really needs this expansion. And since we were able to push against him, box him in with these pylons followed by those force fields, he wasn't able to get to his expansion. He wasn't able to get this extra Vespian gas, and it would be very hard for him to build up a force of Mutalisks that was any sort of a threat. Basically, just with Stalkers and Sentries, it would be very easy to deal with the amount of Mutalisks he could have off of one base. And you can see he's just been starving for those extra resources. The second he got out of his base, the first thing he did was drop down an expansion. And again, it goes back to show you this game is all about economy. It's one of the most important things. So he needed that as soon as possible, and he got it as soon as he could. So you can see here now that we have these cannons, it's going to help us deal with these roaches. It'd be very easy for him to just burrow them. Obviously, we do have the observer on the board, but the problem is that once he moves out of the range, or once he moves over here, if we don't follow him precisely, then we could lose the roaches. So having these cannons up helps a ton as well. Also, something to realize is that in expanding, obviously our Zerg opponent's economy is hurt, but in expanding we do stretch ourselves a little thin. And since he's been off one base, basically all he's been doing is pumping out units this entire time. So we are actually worried about the amount of forces that he could have, because again, spreading ourselves a little thin for a certain amount of time when we get an expansion. Obviously, once that expansion is saturated, you get fully going, then you have a huge advantage, but until that point, you are a little thin when it comes to unit size against someone who's been pumping out units straight off of one base. So you can see here pushing against us, this is where we really want to start to prepare any sort of transitions as well. You can see we have this robotics facility, getting out some immortals. Also not going to be a bad idea to start to get some upgrades at this point. Not going to hurt you very much. Another thing to consider is that when you get an expansion, usually a good time to drop additional buildings. You can see these 2 other gateways coming. You know, you can only support so much off of one base, but once you expand, you can afford more, and as such, you want to drop down more production buildings. So getting some more production buildings, preventing ourselves from getting supply blocked, and there you go, seeing that weapons research coming up. I would also consider expanding again at this point. Once we mass up a little bit more forces, maybe breaking down these destructible rocks, moving over here to expand. And again, with this observer out, we're easily able to deal with those roaches. And again, people are going to say, well, why does he not have Mutalisk? What is he doing? He must be a terrible Zerg player. You have to realize he is just now probably getting up this expansion, getting it saturated. You can see at this point, not even saturated. He is fully getting the gas because he needs it. And once more, off of one base, he couldn't really afford Mutalisk. He couldn't afford enough to do a lot of damage. So that's why he had not gone for that. So back to the Conky Vision here, we can see easily able to take out those burrowed roaches with this observer. Not much of a problem. Something to consider also with that upgrade, roaches do regenerate faster when they're burrowed, so that's another tactic that they use. Even if we're able to spot them, the roaches in the back are going to be able to regenerate pretty quickly, so that's something to worry about. Now at this point, we kind of amassed up tons of forces. We do have this immortal out, so we're going to be pushing out against our opponent. Also not a bad idea to check this 3rd expansion. You really want to be careful that he's not getting more expansions than you. We haven't checked that in quite some time, so wouldn't it be a bad idea to, while having this El Naga tower, push out over here and get this 3rd expansion. So let's just go over that build order one more time, guys. We started off with a 9 Pylon over here. Start off with the 9 Pylon, opened up with a 12 gateway as well, followed by a 14 Assimilator. Following that with a 20 Cybernetics Core at 21 supplies when we saw that 2nd gateway come down. 22 supply, getting that warp gate tech. 32 supply, getting our 2nd Assimilator. At 35 supply, we saw these 2 additional gateways, again just going for a standard 4-gate build, and then at 54 supply, getting that Nexus. Key things to note in this video, we saw an early push coming. Don't panic. You obviously need to buy yourself time to get up this wall and get that Zealot in the choke. Not going to be a bad idea to drop some pylons in front of his base. That should be your first instinct, really. That can slow him up a lot. Now, I wouldn't suggest letting them go all the way through. Let them build until they're just about finished and then cancel them. You get your resources back. It buys you enough time to get that Zealot wall in, and you should be all set from that point. Then after that, we knew that they were hurt economically, so we decided to further add upon that by pushing out against them, forcing him to cancel this expansion because the forces we had were just too strong for that, and then further blocking him in with pylons as well as force fields, get an expansion, dealing with burrowed roaches by getting an observer. And yeah, this can be a really good tactic for you guys. So once again, this has been Force StarCraft 2 strategy. If you guys like our videos and you like what we're doing here, please do go ahead and subscribe to our channel. Keep watching and keep owning, guys. So as soon as this comes in, pretty much the tide of the game has turned in our favor. Warping in a Dark Templar here. We have this proxy pylon up here, warping in a Dark Templar. Going to be going straight for the mineral line. That's target numero uno, essentially. That's really what you want to take down. And obviously this Dark Templar going to help us easily fend off this attack because there is nothing that he can do. He cannot see this again because he has no Robo Bay.